fundamental question that everyone must ask is, why did this thing happen to me? And a person generally asks that only about misfortunes. And every person says, why did this happen to me? And when we attempt to find an explanation, we see that there are two categories of explanation. Two categories. One reason that things happen to a person has to do with the acquisition of shleimus. The acquisition of shleimus, of perfection. And what we said was the following, that essentially a person has free will, he has the capacity to choose, and in that capacity called free will, he literally has a creative power where he can affect his own reality, his own sense of self, and his own neshama. If the person attempts to relate with the Rebbeinu Shalom very carefully, if he develops an intimate relationship with the Rebbeinu Shalom and manifests a type of consciousness called Yirah Shamayim, what happens is he begins to construct his neshama or influence his neshama in such a way that he establishes his own neshama on an eternal basis. He establishes his sense of self in an eternal way. If, however, he chooses to ignore what the Rebbeinu Shalom says and distances himself from the source of all spirituality, then what happens is he brings in certain types of consequences which will lead, perforce, to his destruction. A person literally has the ability to either create means to give himself an eternity or destroy himself. Destroy himself means to annihilate himself from existence. He has that power. Creation or annihilation in terms of eternal existence. We've gone into that. I'm not going to go into that further. It stems from the concept of free will, because free will, as we've said, transcends existence. The ability to have will, to decide on that which is totally free. The ability to have free will means that when you decide something, it is beyond existence, because nothing in reality will pressure you one way or the other. The only way you will make that decision comes from the innate inner core of what you are. And that essence of self transcends existence. So free will, or the capacity of free will, in certain ways makes a person similar, or in certain ways replicates certain aspects of God himself. And the gift of free will is a certain replication of forces that come from a transcendental reality, where the Rebbeinu Shalom himself is involved. Because of the fact that man can create or destroy himself, and the mitzvahs are the medium in which he creates or destroys himself, when that person finishes his life or establishes a certain level, the Rebbeinu Shalom has to judge him. Judgment means that the Rebbeinu Shalom has to essentially assess the existential condition of that person. That's all. Din has nothing to do with setting a person on trial or simply judging a person in terms of different things he's done. Essentially, it is nothing more than an existential assessment. The Rebbeinu Shalom looks at him and looks at the level of existence in which this person has acquired, and he sees whether or not that person in some way has created the seeds for eternal existence, or that he has created the seeds of annihilation. And mitzvah din, the attribute of justice, simply follows suit. And that's it. God does not reward or punish, as we said, according to the law of justice. According to the concept of true justice, there is no such thing called reward, and there's no such thing called punishment. All there is something called creation and annihilation. God does not reward you or punish you. He simply follows the consequences of your actions and follows suit. That's all. So that if you have done what's proper, you will have created yourself for eternity. If you have done that which is improper, you will take yourself out of the possibility of existence. And all the Rebbeinu Shalom simply does is allow the consequences which you've developed to materialize. That is the true meaning of din, or the true meaning of justice. The question remains about an individual who has done many good deeds, but he's also done certain deeds which are very evil. We have said that Olam Haba, which is the future world, which is the ultimate destiny of all people, is a place of shleimus, of perfection. In the future world, there is only existence or non-existence. There is no such thing as existence and non-existence at the same time. Either you exist or you don't exist. There are no semi-categories, which means that if a person was a tzaddik, most of his life he devoted himself to do commandments. He develops himself a certain sense of spirituality. What happens is he has created an aspect of existence. But at the same time, if the person has transgressed he has also perforce introduced elements of annihilation. A person cannot exist and non-exist at the same time. Hence, what God must do is purify the individual by making him absolutely homogeneous. And the way he does that, you see, is to look at the dominant factor of the person. He says, did this person do more good deeds or more evil deeds? Or rather, what the Banishim does, he looks at a certain threshold. It is the threshold of creation. And he looks at the person and he says, did this person accomplish, or did this person create enough power in himself to survive eternally? If the person has achieved that threshold, then the Banishim says, I ordain, or rather, this person has the right to exist forever. If the person is below that threshold, then the Banishim will annihilate him. And that's it. You see. So what the Banishim then is essentially look at the person's deeds, and he sees the existential level on which he's arrived at. If the person, for example, has arrived above the threshold, he then can claim by virtue of the powers that he has, the powers of creation, to say, I have the right to be. I have the right to exist eternally. Therefore, I have the right to reside in Olam Haba, which is that place, in the future world. But what happens if the person has also done many transgressions or many evil deeds? Those deeds will demand or claim in the same instant non-existence or annihilation. So what the Banishim does is a very, very strange thing, and we cannot go into the mechanism, it is extraordinarily deep. What he does is the following, and hold on to this idea. Justice or true din, as he said, is a question of existence. To be or not to be. That's what it means, din. God looks at you and says to be or not to be. Therefore, what good deeds do, good deeds or mitzvahs affect your existence so that you're able to survive eternity. Averis affect your existence so that you cannot survive eternity and you must expire. When I don't mean expire through death, I mean ultimate expiration, which means complete annihilation. But that's an existential affair. Justice is an existential condition. Justice is a statement about what you must be. You see. In order for the Banishim to reconcile good deeds which cause existence and bad deeds which cause non-existence, he must change the status. And what he does is that he allows the good deeds, in the case of a tzaddik, to determine the existence of the person. And he says, you have performed enough good deeds to determine the fact that you will continue to be. And then he looks at the evil deeds and he removes them from the person's existence. We say he externalizes them. And we've explained that very carefully in the sense that he takes the evil consequence of what that person did and takes it out of the person's existence, out of the person's substance, totally. And he has it in his hand. He has the neshama in one hand, and the mitzvahs that the neshama did are embedded in the existence of the neshama. But the evil that the neshama did is taken out or externalized in the neshama. And the Banishim has the evil or the hate in his hand. That's literally what's happening. He has it in his hand, you see. So that evil cannot be a statement about that neshama's existence. Because the neshama now can claim to survive, because it has done enough good deeds to survive. But the Banishim takes the evil deeds that it's done and does not allow those evil deeds to comment or say something about the existence of the neshama. Rather, he has it in his hand. And what he does, he slaps it on the neshama's back. External to the neshama, but not internal. You see. So this is a very, very fundamental mechanism. This is the essence of how God saves the world. He externalizes that which should be internalized. That which should say whether or not you should exist or not, no longer has the capacity to say it. You see. This is the essence of his compassion. So what he does is, he externalizes the evil deeds and the negative elements, and he simply attaches it to the neshama, so to speak, or to the person as an external element, so it has the ability to cause the person to suffer, but not to be annihilated. And that's what it is. And as it causes the person suffering, as the evil deeds that a person has done is now not part of him, but is outside of him, attached to him, like the example I use, like a Frankenstein on his back. That Frankenstein has a stick and constantly beats him on the head. But the point is that as he suffers through the evil that he has done, that evil itself is annihilated. You see. it itself disappears. So in the end, the evil that a person has done annihilates itself by coming back to the person and causing him an equivalent amount of pain. But it can do that because it's external to the person. If the evil was allowed to rest within the being of the person, it would force his annihilation. But since it's externalized and placed on top of him, it cannot do that. It can only come back and simply cause him sorrow. That's all. And as it causes him sorrow or problems, difficulties, it slowly evaporates or annihilates itself. You see. So that's how a tzaddik survives into the next world, even though he's done evil things. No man has done purely good, totally good. A tzaddik is able to survive because the evil that he's done is taken out of him and attached to him, and then it allows itself, the Baruch Hashem allows the evil to annihilate itself. That's what suffering does. What about a rasha? What about a person who's extraordinarily evil? A person who's devoted his life to immense cruelty? Well, then God looks at that person, and He looks at the nature of his existence, and He says, wait a minute, have you achieved the minimal level of good deeds that are required to sustain yourself for eternity? And He looks at the person and He says, no, you have not. When I look at you, the Baruch Hashem says, I see in your existence that the evil that you have done has completely ruined your existential fabric or the way that you are, so you cannot survive. That person therefore must go out of existence. But that Rasha will also have done certain good deeds. You see, because every Rasha, most of them, even have some kind of good deeds that he's done. There could be a certain time in his life when he did a chesed, he did a mitzvah. That deed must be repaid. So what does the Baruch Hashem do? Well, as it is, it's also a contradiction. Because the evil that the Rasha did demands annihilation. That one good deed, or the couple of good deeds, or whatever that he did, demands eternity. So what the Baruch Hashem does is externalize the good, so that the good is no longer a statement of the person, just the evil. And the evil will completely destroy him. But the Baruch Hashem has to pay back the good, so he externalizes the person and slaps it on his back. And that good, which is now external to the person, gives the person great reward, or which is exactly commensurate with the goodness that he's done. And as that goodness rewards the person by giving him certain good things in life, it eats itself up, or basically evaporates, and then it disappears. So all that Rosh is left with is simply the consequences of evil deeds. You see? This is essentially how it works. This is the relationship between justice and mercy. Justice means God looks at existence. Mercy means that He refuses to look at existence and He externalizes what you have done and does not allow those deeds to what? To interfere with the permanence of your existence. And that's how He deals with it. And by doing that, all the people who arrive in the eternal life will be pure. Either you will exist or you will not exist. All tzaddikim that go into the future life, you see, will go into the future life with claims to existence, each one on a different level. But all the evil deeds that these good people have done will have been gone. The same thing with all the Rishonim. All the Rishonim were the evil people, and they're not that many, relatively to that. All those people will what? Have in them the fact that they must be destroyed. And the good that they did will have been what? Will have been completely eaten up by the mazel, or the good things that God did for them while they lived in this world. So that in the next world, the Rishonim will not be able to claim anything good, and they will be annihilated. So that's it. That world is a state of perfection. Either you exist or you don't. Where does God externalize? Where does God repay the tzaddik with his evil deeds and the rasha with his good deeds? So that ultimately, when he enters into the future world, he enters as a pure being, either existing or non-existent. He does it here. So fundamentally, we see that to a certain extent, the good mazel, or the hatzlacha that a person has, the successful aspects that a person has, and the troubles and the difficulties and the agonies of life, these two things to a certain extent, and probably to a large extent, at least at this point in time, are really efforts by the Baruch Shalom to cleanse him, to purify him, so that the person can lay claim to Olam Haba in a completely perfect fashion. So therefore, many times when a person suddenly sees an upsurge of mazel, you see, or good things happen to him, he's got to question that. Now this you have to be very careful, and this is why I went through the whole thing. You see, an evil person who's really evil, who suddenly starts seeing his muzzle go up, has a great deal to be worried about. He does. If he had a brain in his head, he would say, 1 minute, I'm such a terrible person. Why am I such a rich man? He's got something very serious to worry about. Because the answer is quite obvious. He is rich, so that he will no longer occupy any place in eternity. The person who's a tzaddik, who's suffering a great deal, looks at his suffering and saying, I'm such a good person. I do the best I can. Why do I suffer so much? And the answer is, you suffer so much because the Baruch Hu wants to make sure that you are pure and perfect when you do go into the eternal existence. So that's the aspect. This world then is a cleansing place. It is a place which removes the minority of a person's deeds, so that it is completely evaporated, wiped away, and the majority of a person's deeds determines what will happen to him in the future. But that is only one reason why things happen to people. You see, one of the hashgachas, or the providences which control why people experience good, pleasure, success, and why they experience pain, or lack of success, failure, or agony, is this purification process. But is this the only reason? No, it is not the only reason. It only constitutes one kind of mechanism in which God does. You see, it is a very critical mechanism and an enormously deep one. It is essentially the mechanism of what's called purification, where God purifies an individual so that he can enter into a future life in a positive or in a negative way. But is that the real reason for a person's vicissitudes or the things that happen in his life? No, there's a more primary reason. As we have said, and we cannot elaborate, a person was created for one purpose and one purpose only. And I've established this last week, and I want to say it's just a very critical idea. God intends for all of us, all those souls that He has created, to exist at a time and in a place which will last for eternity. And that the essential activity of that time will be the experience of a total and ultimate ecstasy. Perfect happiness. That place is called Olam Haba. Perfect happiness is an experience which is only true of a place called Olam Haba. Perfect happiness is not true of a place called Olam Hazeh, which is this life. Why is that? Because the Baruch Hu created all souls in which to benefit them, to give them a state of perfection, of perfect happiness, a great ecstatic ecstasy and joy. But a soul which is created in the image of God demands to what? To develop its own existence on its own. It doesn't want gifts. It doesn't want handouts. It does not understand the concept of welfare. It insists that it creates its own ultimate destiny. So the Baruch Hu says, I will allow that. I will allow you to create your own ultimate destiny. And in order to do that, I will create a place called the physical universe. And I will hide myself and I will make you find me. You will have to choose for that Olam Haba. You will have to work. So this world, which is what we see around us, this world in which we occupy, the entire physical world, has its specific function to allow the neshama to choose between good and evil, between becoming closer to God or going further away. And that choice will determine what will happen to it in the ultimate future self. That's why this world is not a world which was created for the state of perfect happiness and joy. It is a world which is created for work. The Gemara says, Talmud says, Adam lo omar yulad, a person was created for the purposes of travail, of work. What does that mean, work? It doesn't mean a 9-to-5 job. It means for the struggle of developing a spiritual consciousness. That's why you exist now, and that's why this world exists, and that's why this world looks the way it does. For only one reason and one reason only. To develop, to give you the opportunity to develop a state of spiritual consciousness. When that opportunity is no longer necessary, when God decides, when He looks at your neshama, that you no longer require any more opportunities. He already sees what you've done, and He knows what the situation is, and He's allowed you to do what you have to do, or not do what you were supposed to do. That moment is when you die. Because death is nothing more than the cessation of opportunity. It is not the cessation of being. It is not the cessation of existence, because existence goes on. with the soul. Death is the cessation of opportunity to choose and create. That's why this world in which we live in, is nothing more than a constant opportunity to build. We build in the future, we build now what we will inhabit in the future. We are born with a blank slate, a blank board, and we are given a piece of chalk, and Buddhism says to us, write. But you can write whatever you want to, but you can only write now, here, while you live in this world. At the moment that the Buddhism decides that what? He no longer wants to give you the ability to write whatever you want on the board, he confiscates the chalk. And the confiscation of the chalk is called death. That's the essence of this world. The essence of this world is to provide for you a series of opportunities to allow you to choose. The essence of the next world is to experience the level of existence in which you created. And since happiness is an experience, true happiness or ultimate happiness happens there, not here. That's not to say that you can't be happy over here. Don't misunderstand me. But since we all look for perfect happiness, because we all sense that we want something perfect, I tell you that perfect happiness is not here. You see, this is a place of relative happiness. But the main purpose of this world or this life is to work to develop a God consciousness, to put yourself on a more profound level of wisdom and good deeds and spirituality. And that, the acquisition of that, is the critical feature of why God made this world. If God had no need for you to be tested, and for you to have to go create, and for you to actually work to develop your eternity, He would never create a physical universe. God does not do anything for nothing. Everything He does has an exact reason, and an exact mechanism is created in which to provide for that reason. That's why a great deal of the deeds that happen to you in this life, the events that happen to you in this life, must subscribe to that theme. And since the essential theme of this world is opportunity, most of the things that happen to you in your life are opportunities. Where do they come from? The Buddhism gives them. He determines them. And you don't know that. You think that you go through life in some kind of direction as if you control it. That's not true. It is the Buddhism that leads you from one opportunity to another, so that He forces you to choose one way or another. And that's what it is. And it is the Buddhism that ultimately will determine what opportunities that you need. If the Buddhism decides that He wants to see whether or not you will be stuck up, He will make you rich. Because He wants to know, what are you going to do with this wealth? Will this wealth bring you nearer to God or further from Him? Will this wealth develop in you midos or personality traits that have to do with compassion, that have to do with love of fellow man? Or will this wealth take you away from fellow man and allow you to self-indulge? You see, will it make you more arrogant or will it make you more humble? So the Buddhism will make you rich to find out. You're not becoming rich because there's something about you that deserves to be wealthy. The only thing about you that deserves to be anything is that you deserve the right to create your own eternity. That you deserve, because that's what God made, and that's what He wants. So you have the right to go to Buddhism and say, you made me for the purpose of what? Of creation. I have the right to do that. So the Buddhism says, then I will give you the opportunity to create. But you cannot determine what that opportunity is, or how He will determine, how that opportunity will lead to your ultimate destiny. Only the Buddhism does that. If the Buddhism wants to see to what extent you will want to adhere to this mitzvah, He may make you poor, or He may make it in such a way that you constantly fail, because He wants to see to what extent you will have trust in Him, to what extent you will have faith in God, that God is the ultimate arbiter of what existence really is about. So the Buddhism will make you poor. That's another thing. So therefore we see that hatzlacha, or success, and failures are directly what? Are a direct outgrowth of the kinds of opportunities that the Buddhism wants to give you. And depending on what He wants to see from you, those are the kinds of conditions He will create. In effect, we see therefore that there are two fundamental criteria which God uses to determine what will happen to you. The first criteria, as I've said before, is that life events, the events that you go through in life, purify you. That's one. They purify you depending on what you've already done. And the other, more important reason is that most of life events are given to you to see what you will do. So again, the critical or the major reason why a person is created, and the major reason which determines God's providence, is what is opportunity. Where the Rebbeinu will extend to you different kinds of events to see how you will behave. Depending on how you behave, He will then determine whether or not you need purification. If your life has consisted mostly in good deeds, then suddenly the Rebbeinu will begin to take these events to purify you of your bad deeds. If a great deal of the opportunities you were given in life you used for bad deeds, then the Rebbeinu will begin to take some of these opportunities to purify you of your good deeds, so that you have nothing left, you see. But these are the two criteria in which He uses. A person has this more than once. A person is brought down to this world in which to choose and create. Let's say he fails to do it. Then the Rebbeinu has the option, and normally exercise the option, of bringing him back down again. So that after the person dies, at a certain period of history, he will come back down again to recreate certain aspects of those opportunities. But not the same as he's done before, you see. And depending on what new opportunities are necessary, that will determine the new kind of lifestyle. Now there are certain people that are brought back, you see, and are allowed to choose again. They're allowed to create. They're allowed to undo possibly the damage they did somewhere else. Or they're allowed to actually fulfill what they failed to do before. They are allowed, you see. But there are certain kinds of people that are not allowed to do that. So they are brought back simply to undo the damage that they've done before, and nothing else. That's why you find the case of children who are born and die, or people who are born diseased and never get out of it in any way. You see, these people are neshamas. They are souls that are being brought back down again to undo damages that were done before. And the life that they're in now is not a life of opportunity. Because the Rebbeinu is not interested anymore in terms of what they actually will do. You see, a person, a child who's born, for example, mongoloid, you see, an individual like that, a child like that has no capacity for free will. He doesn't. Because he never can reach true mature wisdom. So the question is, why does God create that kind of person? The answer is the Rebbeinu creates that kind of individual. You see. So that in some way, that condition will undo damages that he has done before. What that damage is, how the condition will remove that, is something which is not clearly knowable. But that's clearly what it is. Because life has only two reasons. Everything which happens to you has only two reasons. It's either one or the other. Either the thing which is happening to you is in some way an exploration of new opportunities, that's one, and that's the usual reason, or in some way what's happening to you is nothing more than a vehicle or an instrument that God is now using to purify you of something that you did before, either in this time or in some other time. You see what I'm saying? That's what it is. And there is no other reason for the things that happen to you. That's essentially, well, technically there's no other reasons. There are some variations on the theme. But as far as you're concerned and we're concerned, these are the two criteria. So every time you move through life and you see suddenly that you may have certain successes or certain failures and you want to examine it, these are the two criteria in which you must examine it.
Because a mongoloid wouldn't reincarnate again at the end.
Essentially, probably not. We know from certain statements that there are only 4 times that a person is reincarnated.
But what about just like in the 30s time? That person wouldn't reincarnate again?
That depends. It's not so much what that person will do. It has to do also with the time. We have reached the last. As far as we are concerned, and I can say this with pretty much surely, this is the last generation. As far as we're concerned, there are no reincarnations after this time, basically, because the advent of the Mashiach is so close that Gilgul is almost finished. So either you do it here or you don't do it, and it's a frightening prospect. But really that's what it is. We are so close to the end. We're so close to the end that the capacity of Gilgul is no longer viable, you see. Everyone that had to come down is down. That's one reason why there's so many billions of people, you see. One reason why there's so many people now as against before is because so many people are having returning. So the whole thing is being done now in one fell swoop. It's like the last generation that's purifying everyone and everybody, you see, right until the Mashiach comes, when the thing finally starts in a different way.
Rabbi, the purification, is it only through suffering that Hashem, or is it other ways?
The only other alternative to suffering is tshuva. That's the only other alternative to suffering, repentance. The only way to avoid, once you've done certain deeds and you've done certain damages, the only other way to avoid possible suffering, you see, to remove the bad effect of it, is tshuva, repentance. In that way you can literally prevent the din from coming down on you, in many cases. But tshuva means what? Tshuva means understanding what you did wrong, and really attempting not to do it again. That's the essence of tshuva, you see. And if you really work on it, even if you fall back a couple of times, that's not critical. But if you essentially try and go up, you make 2 steps forward for every 1 step back, that is enough for the Baruch Hashem to begin to consider the possibility of allowing the tshuva to remove the past deeds, you see. That's a critical thing. Yes. Who?
There is a room in the concept, the popular view where people shave their own lives in circumstances. They create those opportunities by having that process, by creating.
Yes, people. Yes, it's what's called the serial effect of opportunities. And let me just go into this. Let me just go into the aspect of the opportunities that we create, and let me go into the matter now further deeply, because I'm more or less up to where I should be. When you start out in life, and you're, let's say, 22 years old, and you have done a certain number of good deeds. Those good deeds that you do of a person's, you start out in life, and you've achieved a certain amount of deeds. Those deeds have the effect of influencing other deeds. And this is a very critical thing. It's very similar to a chain reaction. At the outset, we'll take a very simple case. At the outset, what the Baruch Hashem does, he gives you a choice in 2 directions. I'm not concerned what that choice is or how he gives you that choice. That's really not relevant. But in his way, what he does is he constructs a choice. And it's very, very critical. The entire process is invisible. I can't emphasize that much. The Baruch Hashem does not announce to you that you're having a choice. He doesn't do that, you see. Nor does he necessarily send you telegraph. In any sense, what he does, basically, he simply puts the choice in front of you so that you are forced to choose. You are forced to act one way or another. That's what he does. And depending on how you act, that will determine the next step. So that it is so subtle you don't even know that you're really involved in some kind of choice. And you have no awareness, really, that choice is really beginning to set a whole domino effect later on. At the outset, let's say the Baruch Hashem gives you a choice, and that choice involves 2 things. Okay, so you can either go this way or that way. Okay? One way is good, and the other way is not so good. Let's say, for example, you choose the not so good way. Okay? What happens? Once you've chosen that way, you see, then this way itself will instantly open up 2 paths based on the level that you've reached. When you've chosen to go here, you come to a certain point. This line here is the total road of your existence. Now, at the outset, you start in the beginning. But once you come to the point and you've chosen, you are now have traversed a certain amount of existence as well. Hence, the choice that you are given now could never be identical to the choice at the outset. Because you are not the same person. Every time you choose, and every time you go in a different direction, you are no longer the same person. You change from hour to hour. Now you say, that's absurd. I'm the same person now that was an hour ago. That's not really true. Because depending on what you've done in that hour, it has influenced aspects of your thinking, aspects of your feeling, and will precondition or sensitize you to whole new directions. Hence, the new opportunities that the Baruch Hashem brings down must be shaped very differently. which means a very critical fundamental formula or rule, that as we traverse the path of existence called life, we change along that path. And as we change along that path, the Bunishom's way of testing us or giving us opportunities must change proportionally, so that the test which is given later on can never be the same as the test that's given before. It's not possible. Hence, at this point, this choice is totally different than the choice over here. Now, let's say at the second venture, you do something which is good. Let's say at the second point, it's done good. Now, is that the same as if you would have done that good thing the first time around? Is it? No. It's a whole different good deed. Because this good deed is now based on an initial bad deed, you see. It is already preconditioned by something else. So this good deed doesn't have the same power as that original good deed. You see, it is different, it is weaker, but it is still strong. It is still strong. Let's say, at this point, you are now tested again. And again you have good and bad. You see. Well, now you're at a whole different stage in the game. Which interruption comes. Can you really ever go back? Yes and no. You can never really go back because you're no longer the state of consciousness that you were then. You have different information. You have a totally different set of values at a different point in time. So you cannot claim to be as innocent or naive as you were at the outset. You cannot compare the opportunities given to a 22-year-old to the opportunities given to a 32-year-old. How can you compare that? They may look like the exact opportunity, but the mind of a 22-year-old is totally different than a 32-year-old, you see. A 32-year-old has gone through so much more. He's experienced so many different things. His understanding of life is different, you see. His inner personality is much more hardened. So you can't compare that. What does that mean to go back? Can you go back in the second that just passed? No. Just like you cannot go back to the second that just passed. You cannot go back to the existential level that just passed. You cannot. There is a block. Just like there is a block in time, there is a block in existence. Now, the way I understand your question is that you're asking it really from a certain level of anxiety. Well, but does that mean it's too late? No, that's what you're saying, and it's not too late, not at all. It is true you can never really go back, but it's not too late. Because you have a weapon at any point in time to undo damages. There is one weapon that God gave you see, to annihilate the bad that you've done, and that's called tshuva. It's called tshuva. But the ability to do tshuva, or the ability to do repentance, depends on where you are in the ladder also. It is much easier for an older person to do tshuva than a younger person, from one respect. Why? Because the younger person is still in the heat and passion of life. You see. So, let me ask you, there are two different ways to look at it. It is more difficult for a younger person to do tshuva than an older person. Why? Because a younger person, it's more difficult because he wants to be involved in life. If a young person is involved in many chatoim and he gets great pleasure from it, he doesn't want to get out of it so strongly. So for him to develop a sacrifice, to develop self-control, is much more difficult for a young person than for a person who's 65 years old who no longer has the same desires. It's much easier for a 65-year-old to swear up doing certain things, right, than it is for what? For a 25-year-old. The 65-year-old anyway has lost a great deal of the youthful endurance and stamina. So what's the big deal of the tshuva? So at the same time, the tshuva does count, but it cannot be as potent as a tshuva younger person. But it also works in reverse. It is easier in a certain way for a younger person to tshuva than an older one. Why? Because an older person, if he's lived his entire life in a sinful way, it is very difficult for him to admit at 65 that his life was a waste. So that all the years of his life will simply resist, you see, tshuva. Because they'll say if you do tshuva, in essence what you're saying is that your life has been a total waste. How can you do that? It's better to die like this than see your life as a wasteland. Whereas a young person who's 25 hasn't started that much along the road, so he can always follow a different path. He doesn't have to admit anything, because his life is still up ahead. So there are different angles, you see. What the Banishim does is measure exactly all the specific variables which are involved in any particular tshuva event. He looks at your age, he looks at the level in the Shema, he looks at where you are on the path. And he sees the level of the struggle of that tshuva. And that's what he judges. How difficult is this tshuva? How much mysterious nefesh is this person really giving to do this tshuva? And that is basically what the Banishim looks at. You see. But this is the critical thing. Life is constantly changing. Constantly. So that a person suddenly will find at 40 in a whole different lifestyle than he was at 20. Suddenly you'll find himself becoming wealthy at 40. Why? Because now this age, the Banishim has decided that new kinds of opportunities are needed and new tests are needed, whereas it wasn't needed before. But one thing is clear, that later opportunities are essential function or dependent on early opportunities. And this is the thing. These opportunities are based on these ones. The earlier, the antecedents always control the consequences, those which follow. You see. And all of life is a constant, relationship over time between the things that you do. And this tells us an incredible thing. What is that? It tells us an amazing thing, that you have the ability to determine where you will go. Literally. Right now, at your point in time, what will happen to you when you're, let's say, 20 years from now is not written, really. It is still to be written. You have the ability to write it. You can write where you will be 20 years from now, and literally create it. Because the Buddhism does not do it without you. He may know what you will be. He knows where you will be 20 years from now, but his knowledge has no relevance to your free will. The Buddhism Kaviyoko sits and waits, and he says, you tell me what to do with you. You're the boss. You tell me what I should do. The Buddhism, essentially, in this capacity, is a passive being. You have no idea how incredible that is. For God to be passive is an incredible nace. It is the highest of all miracles. But in essence, what the Buddhism is saying is, you are the active person. I am the passive one here. I will listen to what you tell me. I will listen to what you have to say. But after you told the Buddhism what you want, he says, now I will do it. And I will determine what the next step is. And then he sits down and he says, Kaviyoko, I now want you to tell me, what should I do? I should do this? He does the next step. Now, stop. What should I do? So that your entire life is a relationship between you and God, except that you don't even know it. Because you don't hear any voices, and there's no talking. But that's literally what it is. Every minute of your life is a direct communication between you and the Baruch Shalom. A direct one, not an indirect one. Every moment of your life, by choosing, you talk to God. And He talks to you back by suddenly creating a new series of consequences. You see, you verbalize in different ways. You verbalize through choosing. He verbalizes through what? Through the construction or the determination of events. But that is a conversation. In fact, it is the most important conversation you will ever have. All the talk that you have with all the friends of your life, right, are absolutely meaningless, well, from a certain standpoint. But the conversation that you have with the Baruch Shalom is the conversation. Why? Because it will determine whether or not you will ever have the ability to talk again. That's why it is the most important conversation. It is an invisible conversation. It is an unknowable conversation. But it is a conversation. And tzaddikim know it. That's why they're so far ahead of our game. Why is it that tzaddikim, or great righteous men, have the capacity for such wisdom and they know what these things are? Because they know life is a continuous talk with God. And they don't waste their time, you see. They know that what they do will influence what the Baruch Shem does in return. And not only they can talk, but they learn how God talks back. You see. They learn the rules of the game. So they see. They can see. They say certain things, meaning they choose certain things, and they wait for the response. Just like a scientist, it's an incredible thing. It's a scientist that says, I will now observe my life. Let me see what's going to happen in the next day or two. Let me see what will happen with respect to this particular event. And they watch it. Because they watch it because they know that it's not coming from them. They know that it is a response to that which they've done before. They are not the fools that they think that they created the next moment in the sense that they could control the opportunities. They know they can. So what they do is they talk, they say what they have to say, and then they sit and they wait. They see what God says back. And what happens in the next point in their life is God talking back to them. And then they sit and think, wait a minute, let's see. Why is he telling me this? What is he saying by this? By allowing me to succeed or to fail. God is telling me something. What is he saying? And they sit and they concentrate on it. And on the basis of what he says back, they make their next move. And they say, I want to say this. And they say their statement. And then they wait again. So you see that the life of a real tzaddik is totally different than our lives. We go from one situation to another, thinking that in some way we plan ahead and we work ahead and we can control what goes on. You see. So we constantly stumble and fumble. You see. Because we're not involved in a discourse. We're not involved in talking at all. We're involved in a one-way conversation. And we think we make unilateral decisions. So of course we cannot understand, we have no feedback, because we don't know that the things that happen in life is the feedback that God is giving us. God talks to us through what he does to us. That's the feedback. And through the feedback we see. And if we are smart, scientists are incredibly busy learning the language of dolphins. But they would be far wiser if they tried to struggle to learn the language of God. And God talks in these ways. That's another way that a tzaddik thinks, a great righteous man thinks. So you can see whole differences between the way a tzaddik thinks and the way a regular person thinks. Now you may say, but does a person really have that right? Does a person really have the right to second guess God or try and figure out? And the answer is yes. Because the Gemara, the Talmud says that. The Talmud says that if troubles come on a person, if sorrows come on a person, then immediately for a male, the first thing they have to do is examine, is he learning Torah or not? Or is he wasting his time? Is he learning Torah? And if he finds that he is learning Torah sufficiently, is he attempting to grow? Then he has to examine. Are there any specific deeds that warrant examination? You see. In other words, what the Talmud says is that same with regard to their tasks. No two people have the same task in life. They don't. What determines their task essentially has to do with where they came from in the super soul called Adam Rishon. There was once a great person called Adam, the first man. And his neshama was the collective neshama, or the super neshama, of all people that ever followed from him. All mankind are nothing more than fragments of Adam Rishon. Hence, every neshama in some way was located in a certain place in the neshama of Adam Rishon. And that location determines its essential task. You see. So the first thing that God judges, he looks at you and he sees where are you coming from. In other words, what is the task that I built into your neshama that I want you to do? Now you may say, but I don't know what I'm supposed to do. Don't worry about it. God will lead you to what you're supposed to do. Because the opportunities that he gives you are consistent with your ultimate objective. That's why the opportunities that are given for one person are totally different than the opportunities that are given to another. Because the two people are totally different paths. Each one has to obtain a relationship with God in a different way. You see. God sees that from one neshama it's more important for him to work on his arrogance. And in another neshama he sees it's more important to work on his anger. God determines exactly from the neshama what qualities that person must work at. You see. So that ultimately he fits into the entire structure of all neshamas. So God will construct the opportunities that will reflect specifically those meters or those personality traits that God wants to test in you. But each person is different. No two people are the same. How do we know that? Because if two people were the same, God is not redundant. There would only be one person. Hence everyone is different. So the person looks at your shurut or your origin. And from this he knows what your task is. After that point, he then begins to look at your life. You see. He looks at your thoughts, he looks at your particular situation. He looks at the effort and the struggle that was your life. How does he judge that? Because he sees what the difficulties was. He sees what the obstacles. God, of course, cannot judge someone in a poor man as he does the concept called struggle? Of course not. If a poor man or a person who is not so wealthy devoted himself to the welfare of other people, and if a rich man did that, you can't judge them in the same vein. Because the poor man, there was a much greater struggle. Hence, the Baruch must consider all these nuances. What the Baruch must consider ultimately is not only what your task is, but the mysterious nefesh, the sacrifice in which you struggle to achieve that task. And that depends on what? On the circumstances of your life. You see. So it's very difficult to judge two people. Because we never really know. You see, what? We never understand clearly the interface between the person's koiches, his abilities that come from what? Himself and his essential conditions. The Baruch also judges you with respect to your what? To where you were born, to your family. You can't compare a person who was born in a non-religious family to a person who was born in a religious family in terms of doing mitzvahs. Of course not. So the Baruch takes into consideration your entire what? Condition, your family situation. But he also takes into consideration where you live in what city. A person, the opportunities that a person goes through in New York City is totally different than what he goes through in Philadelphia or in St. Louis. There are different things. There's a different climate. There's a different thinking process in St. Louis than there is in New York. As anyone knows who's been out of town. He also judged you in terms of your entire culture. You cannot compare a person born in the American culture with someone who's born in the European culture or the Asian culture. They're wholly different. So therefore the Baruch must consider all these aspects. And he finally considers the aspects of your generation, so that God can only judge you in a certain way in this generation, as against if you were born 400 years ago in the time of very great tzaddikim. If you were born in Europe in Bialystok, among many great tzaddikim, you see, and you saw someone like the Baal Shem, or you saw the Vilna Gaon or the Chavetz Chaim, you are an absolutely different person as if you were born today, or 10 years ago. You see, a person born now, this year, after the death of Moshe Feinstein, who is one of the leading greatest persons in the world, and who just died not even a year ago, can never be compared to a person who was born in a generation where Moshe Feinstein had his what? He had his particular station. Even on that level, because the presence of great men in Israel, the presence of great Jews, totally altered the culture. So therefore, what must be taken into consideration is everything. The origin of the person, the particular situation you find yourself, the sacrifice of the person, the abilities that are given to him, and finally, his generation, his family, his city, his country, his culture, his entire Weltanschauung. Everything is taken into consideration before a judgment is made. And God, and only God, can look in and examine every nuance of every variable. No one else can do that. Who can judge that? No one. The Baruch can look into your mind. He can look into your soul. He can look down to the depths of the what? Of the intrinsic aspect, the mechanism of self, and he can see where that thing's coming from. You can't even do that. Most of the time, you don't even know why you're doing anything. You'll say to yourself, I just did that, but I don't know why. Why was I so emotional? I don't know. Why did I lose my temper? Why did I choose that? Why did I like that dress? Why did I want to go this way? What am I doing here? Why did I call this person? So if you cannot understand clearly the activities that you do, how are you going to be able to understand or judge yourself? And the truth of the matter is, the Baruch is a much fairer judge than you would be to yourself. God is much greater in his capacity to judge the ultimate truth and absolute truth than even you are about yourself. So this is a critical thing. The judgment process is extremely variable, and only God judges with an exactitude in this way. Only God, no one else. Even though God sets up a judicial system in heaven, structurally, with certain kinds of similarities to the way it's down here, so that what happens is, in heaven, there are those forces which are positive and those forces which are negative. Every time a person does a mitzvah, he creates an existential consequence. You see. But that existential consequence is also represented to a spiritual being called a malach. You see. So that a malach is suddenly created out of the deed that you did and represents the deed that you did. The shape and the format and the entire structure of that malach, the thinking of that malach, is a direct reflection of the deed that you just did. It's an extraordinary thing. It's an extraordinary thing. It's so extraordinary, it's very interesting because it is possible. Let me just lay down this very important rule just to bring out this other point. Every deed that you do results in some existential consequence. But it also results, as I said, in the creation of an external being called a malach. That being called a malach is an actual existence, which is an absolute replication of the deed which created him, in every which way. That malach then goes up to the Bnei Shalom, and simply by standing in front of the Bnei Shalom represents what he just did. He has to say nothing. All he has to do is stand, and he's observed. And by his nature, he tells God what you've just done. If you've done an evil deed, then an evil malach is created. Besides the evilness that you've created in yourself, the evil malach is created, and he stands in front of the Bezdin Shemala, the high court, the heavenly court, and so on. So that simply the Buddhism, by looking at all these malachim, make an instant determination on where you're holding. It's as simple as that. These malachim are all symptoms of your condition, you see. But the malachim themselves don't argue back and forth. They don't. Because they, in essence, are the what? They are the representation of your deeds. That's what it means to prosecute or to defend in heaven. Down here you sit down what? If you're a defendant or you're a plaintiff, you sit in the court and you have a lawyer going back and a lawyer going forth. You have a prosecuting attorney and a defending attorney. In essence, there are no defense attorneys or prosecuting attorneys at all. When the Sultan runs up to the Bnei Shalom and says, this person has done terrible things, the Bnei Shalom says, how do you know? So the Sultan says, watch. And up come all the malachim that we created from the deeds. And he simply says, stand there. And that's all. That is all the evidence that's necessary. There's no talk. There are no exhibits for the defense over the prosecution. It's all right in front of you. It's all existence itself. To such an extent that we find a very unusual thing. It is possible sometimes, if a person has achieved a great level of spirituality, a very great tzaddik, it is possible for him to call down the malach that he created from his learning. It is an amazing kind of phenomena. I mean, how it is done is not very, it's a very mystical process. Obviously, it has to do with practice Kabbalah. But he can call back down the malach that he created from his learning. But there's a slight alteration. Because what it is that malach, even though it's an exact replication of his learning, can turn around to another side and become a receiver from very great light or wisdom, so that he becomes a vessel to that person of very high wisdom. You see, even though that malach is a replication of the person's deed, he can open himself up and make himself into a keli or vessel and allow higher wisdom to come down through him. That kind of malach is called a magid in Hebrew. A magid means a narrator or a teacher or a narrator, but that's essentially what it is. And there were very great men who were able to call down magidim. Magid. The malach ha-magid. Rabbi Yosef Karo, who wrote the Shulchan Aruch, had a magid. In fact, he wrote a whole book on the things that his magid taught him. But Moshe Chaim Luzzatto had a magid at 18 years old already. You see. Now the interesting question is, what is the structure of a malach? Well, that's the thing. What is the structure of a magid? If a person has done good deeds and evil deeds, sometimes he will create a malach who is a what? Who is a combination or a mixture of both. He's a mixture of both. You see. So that when this malach comes down, he can teach you information which is correct and information which is false. How can a malach teach you false information? Because a malach can only do what he is. And since he is composed of pieces, you see, that are negative, he will open himself up as a vessel to that which comes from what? From a negative world. And those are what? Are things which are not true. So therefore, tzaddikim know that they have to examine even what a malach says, because it's not necessarily true. In fact, there are certain ways to know whether what a malach says is true. It's an instant thing. It's not necessarily true. Because it depends on how high the malach is or where he's coming from. There are many, many variables to it. But you can see that you have to be very alert. Because there are many, many influences. The critical thing that I'm saying is basically this. That it all follows from the concept of justice. And justice is nothing more than what? Than the determination of existence. That's all it is. Hence, all justice reflects itself in existence. And that's the basic word. That always put you off. And I feel bad. Okay, I'm going to attempt a very quick, basic kind of answer and so on. It has to do with the essence of a neshama. The truth of the matter is that a neshama is so high that it relates to God, where the powers of God directly. There are no intermediaries between the neshama and the spiritual forces that emanate from God. There are none whatsoever. When the neshama is in its highest pristine state, malachim can't even begin to imagine what that is. They are totally down. They cannot even begin to inhabit or reside in that world. Malachim have nothing to do with Olam Haba. Nothing. Because Olam Haba is too high for them, and that sounds interesting. State, a malach relates directly with God. However, when God took the neshama, when the Baruch took the neshama and brought it back down into this world, there was an incredible shift in the relationship between the powers that emanate from God and those neshamas. So that malachim have to serve as intermediaries. And let me just add one more line to that. In the highest state of a neshama, okay, the highest state of a neshama is such that his relationship with the spiritual forces are static. There is no change. It's like a certain perfect line between the two. But when God decided that the neshama must create its own Olam Haba, what he did was, he took the neshama and altered it so that he put it into a much lower, inferior state. Now in that lower, inferior state, it has the capacity for free will, which is what God wants. But the neshama in a state of free will is an inferior state for the neshama. Even though the gift of free will is a replication of God's ability. You see what I'm saying? But it's an inferior state. In order for the neshama to go down, when it went down, it could no longer relate to its forces directly. Hence, intermediaries became necessary. So the day that when the neshama goes up, they go too. Okay? That's the answer. There are certain malachim who are great. For example, the greatest of all malachim, the greatest of all malachim, who is the vessel between the neshamas and the spiritual forces. He is the essence, he is the vessel, or the power, which is called the malach. His name is Matat. It's a longer name, but you're not allowed to write the name of a malach. Matat. You see. He is the essential vessel of malach. From him proceeds the whole world of malachim. Now there are many very great malachim, you see. There are incredible malachim, and so on. And we know some of them. Gabriel, Michael, who are very powerful malachim. If you would see, for example, there's one malach who relates to Matat from the back end, from the physical end. He is the highest force in the spiritual universe, between the Shamas and God. The highest force between the physical universe, in other words, that relates between God and the physical world, is another malach called Sandalphon, a different one. There's a medrash that says that Moshe Rabbeinu, when he was receiving Torah, he went up into heaven, right? And when he went into heaven, he of course was able to relate to these spiritual beings called malachim. Well, forget about him, he met the lower one, Sandalphon. And when Moshe Rabbeinu, the highest one, met that malach, he was so awestruck that he literally almost collapsed between the power of that malach and Moshe. And Moshe was no small person. The truth is, Moshe is more powerful than any malach. Not now, later. But now, while we exist in the physical realm, malachim are awesome, and the shamas are small, relative to them, you see. But there will come a time in Olam Haba when the shamas are gigantic, and malachim are like bugs. That's literally the relationship. One thing is shifted, because the true relationship of the neshama, a malach can never, ever attain this perfection or the status of the neshama. It's not knowable to a malach. The insight which is capable of a neshama It's not in the realm of existence of a malach. And I can't even begin to even describe that. I mean, if you had any idea of the neshama that sits in you, not literally, but figuratively, you couldn't get up for 6 months. That's how awed and just immobile and paralyzed you'd be. How powerful your neshama is. You have no idea of its enormity. It would take me from now another 6 hours to explain that to you. What a neshama really is. The enormous, enormous power of what that is. And that's the thing of what it is. But that in the future world, in this world, because God wanted to give us free will, He reduced its power. You see. But ultimately, its power will be restored. And when that power is restored, it will be far greater than the Malachim. Much greater. But this is essentially the thing.
When you do a cheder or a skut, is that stored in before Hashem?
Yes, it's represented by Malach.
Is that stored in your neshama? When you do a sin,
it has an existential statement in your neshama, and at the same time it's also represented by a malach.
So when He pulls it out of you, in terms of your balance to prepare for Olam Haba,
that's something else. That's right. That's a whole different structure.
And does He pull it out of your neshama?
Yes, but He pulls it. But the whole pulling out, the externalization of your deeds, means it creates a whole different realm of malachim. That's absolutely true. That's a very sharp observation. The realm of justice creates one realm of malachim, and the realm of externalization or yichud creates a whole different one, a different kind of realm of malachim. There are different kinds of malachim, yichud, that have nothing to do with the ones in Mishpat. They don't look the same. They don't recognize each other.
But so when your neshama is purified, when you get the Frankenstein on your shoulder,
that's the yichud malach.
I know, but
then
you go to Olam Haba. The whole aspect of that neshama, the way you developed it, must be very, very special.
Well,
where is the neshama?
Where
is the neshama? Where? In the blood?
There are different halakim, but it's not in the blood, no.
Where is it? So if you want to talk to it.
It's not a question of where it is. It doesn't reside in a place, but it's if you want, there are different aspects of it, but essentially the critical aspects reside right outside, right above your head, right outside. But it's not knowable, it's not seeable. But there are different aspects of it, and this is sort of not something we should go into. Yes?
Going back to the beginning of the meeting, I understood, you speak about how it is that everything can happen in terms of either being or non-existent.
Yes, that's
I understand how externalizing settings
good.
So to speak, consumes itself.
No, you don't. What you understand is that it cannot consume itself unless it's externalized.
Right, I'm saying.
Because if it's not externalized, it will consume the subject.
Right.
So it must be externalized to consume itself. How it consumes itself is a whole different mystery. That's a whole that is one of the greatest mysteries that God holds. How it does, yes, but the fact that it can.
I understood that a little bit.
No, that's good.
Its nature is.
You're getting there. Okay, good.
But I don't understand the flip side. I don't understand how when Russia has its good deeds that are externalized.
Yes.
And how we say, the Russia is the title in this world is to use up its good.
Right.
I don't understand how that works in the absolute thin terms of systems demanding eternal existence. I mean, if we have, the more pedestrian concept of the reward for mitzvahs just being, well, you did X units of good, you get X units of reward.
Yes, no, I understand. You don't understand.
You can run down.
You want to be told, though, you don't understand why God externalized the goods?
No.
You understand that?
Once it's been externalized, I don't understand how it consumes itself.
The goods.
Right. It's something that's demanding eternal existence. So how is it something that gets used up?
It can only demand eternal existence when it's existentialized, when it lies in the person. Then it demands eternal existence. But when you externalize it, it cannot demand existence at all. It doesn't have a statement about existence. It cannot come to that existence. The essence of externalization means that it simply can demand, you see, an aspect of itself that's be given to the person, or law be given to the person, as an attachment or as a circumstance, but not as an existential condition. That's the essence of externalization, you see. How that works is a very deep, how external does it. But that's the key. That's what the Buddhism did. By externalizing it, that deed is no longer a conditions. It is simply now a statement more about a person's general or variable circumstance. You see.
That the existence that it demands is the good, that external good that he receives.
Yes, that's what it is. Well,
That's what it uses it up.
Yes, it is an aspect of that. Yes, it demands life, but it's a transient goodness. Yeah, because put it this way: internalized goodness demands eternal existence. Externalized goodness demands temporary goodness, or temporary existence of goodness. That's the difference. When it's inside, it talks about existence itself. When it's outside, it simply talks about existence on a temporary basis in time and space. Somehow the switch from the inside to the outside makes a complete switch in its demands on its claims. So that whereas it's inside it can claim eternity, when it's outside it can only claim transient existence. Now, here, you see. But the mechanism, how that works and what the true nature of that is a whole, that's a whole different study.
Does your body feel it when it's externalized?
Yes. Every time you feel a pain, that's external. You do not feel internalized good or bad. Can't. Because you cannot feel your own connection to eternity. What you feel is only externalized. Because when you have a crank, when you have a mountain, that's it. Because since you do not live in eternity, you cannot sense how far much eternity you have, you see. But you can feel it externally. That's the only thing you can feel while you live. Okay, let's...
So when you sit here...
Okay, what I wanted to get to is this. Yisuin Shel Ava, one of the deepest things, but I do want to say one more point which is very critical. Sometimes the B'nai Shem will bring suffering on a person. He will. Not necessarily to purify him, and not necessarily to establish certain kinds of, to purify him. But the suffering is brought as an opportunity. Why? Because let's say you have a person who's very arrogant, who believes in the principle called my hand and my power created my wealth, or my existence, or my control, or whatever the story is. People who believe in themselves to the exclusion of God. And the B'nai Shem says, I want to change his thinking. So what the B'nai Shem does is suddenly the person begins to experience one failure after another. And he doesn't understand. Where is this coming from? You see. I was so successful up to now, and suddenly it's turned around. And I don't know what's going on. For example, it's not a true example, but the Hunt brothers were now experiencing an incredible downfall. The Hunt brothers, who were Texas oil billionaires, are on their way to losing most of their money, which is an astounding thing. Now, everything they ever touched turned to gold. And incredible, in the last 5 years, everything they've touched has turned to stone. How's that possible? Because something was determined, for some reason, and it's not the same reason here, to say enough. And it was no matter how sharp they are, no matter how much money they have, they are constantly losing money. No matter what they do, the investment turns sour. That's the hand of God, but that's the open hand of God. But the Hunt brothers are far too dense to see it. But anyone who has any seichel suddenly realizes that he was successful at a certain point in time, and suddenly he cannot be successful no matter what he does. Obviously the hand of God has turned against him. But to Jews, why does the hand of God turn against you sometimes? To teach you humility, to teach you that God says, I am the one. I am the one who does it. I am the one who creates and destroys, and I am the one who gives life, and who gives death. I am the one who saves, and I am the one who does all these things, not you. And in order to teach you that, I will make you impotent. And that's the essence of the matter, and that's what Yisuin is. When a person suddenly gets sick, a person is a picture of health, and he's a very selfish and arrogant person, and suddenly he becomes very sick. He has a certain bout, for example, with cancer, and he survives. He suddenly realizes his vulnerability. He begins to see that he is not that awesome power that he thought he was. The illusion of omnipotence fades, and he becomes very frightened. But the B'nai Shem wants him to be frightened. Why? Because the Baruch wants him to do tshuva. So therefore, something will come on a person to instigate or to create an incentive for that person to begin to examine his deeds, to do tshuva. When God allows arrogant people to succeed, it is the worst thing for them, as far as they are concerned. Why? Because they will never break the illusion of omnipotence. And that's the worst thing that can happen to them. The best thing that God can do to an arrogant, selfish person is to cause him to fail. Because only then will he realize, wait a minute, there's something wrong. And only then will he begin to sit down and do tshuva. You see, that's the only way. You give success to a person, you see, who thinks that he is created, he has it all. What good are you doing to that person? What really good are you doing? You're destroying him. Because he will never do tshuva. He will be reinforced in that illusion. Sometimes, I see people, I see a person, you see a lot of them. They're very successful men, and so on, and they're wealthy men who are very successful, and you can see their faces imbued with this illusion of their power. And I look at them and I say, the biggest bracha that you can have is beginnings of failure. That's the bracha for you, that you should begin to fail, because you are destroying yourself with that illusion. You see. But the truth is, they have to be zeicha to that bracha. God will not do that, because God will allow them to maintain the illusion. It's only if God begins to want to feel the chesed, that he wants to, because he sees that the person has in him a goodness, that he will begin to cause that person's downfall. And in causing that person's downfall, he is actually elevating the person, because it now gives the person the first real opportunity to do tshuva and to begin to understand the true spiritual consequences of what's happening. It will save him for eternal life. You see. You know, it's very hard for people like us to take this stuff seriously because it is so invisible. But tzaddikim understand it very clearly. There was once a man called the Brisker Rav, a Velva Brisker, who died in the 50s and so on. And he was a very, very great tzaddik, and somebody once asked him a question. And the question that someone asked him was the following, that this person has a choice. The person either has a choice to enter into some kind of the choice that he had to answer was following, that he was drafted into the army, apparently, and the army was at war. I think it was the Israeli army, and there was war at that time, so obviously it's a very great danger. And the only way for him to get out of it is to go to one of the universities, I don't know which one, but the university had an atmosphere of complete apikosis, of atheism. So the choice was either to go into the front of the battlefield, or to go to a university, you see, or some kind of college atmosphere which would encourage this person to become an atheist. So they asked they asked the Brisker Rav, what should we do? So he said, without hesitation, send him into the army. Why? Because in the army, the worst he can do is lose his life. But in this situation, he will lose his soul. And there's not a doubt in a tzaddik's mind which is the more important of the two. Better he should lose his life and retain eternity than keep his life and lose it. But would we think this way? No, the first thing you think, of course you got to get out of the situation. Who wants to die? But at what cost or at what price? So these values are very critical and they must be taken very seriously. And true righteous men, tzaddikim, you see, they don't just believe in this. That's how they think. That's how they look at the world. And they look at the world in the right way. And the way they see the world is exactly opposite the way we see it. The Gemara says, Das Balabayas Tepach Das Torah. The awareness or the understanding of Torah in terms of the way it describes what's real and what's not real is exactly the opposite of what you would normally expect if you would what? Look at life. Because when you look at life, the values that you obtain and the general types are essentially values that are what? Are connected to this world. They're connected to the physical, transient existence. And the essential premise that these thinking does, the essential premise of a person who is not a learned person, a person who is not a Yireh Shamayim, who doesn't fear God, a person who does not know Torah, is to treat physical life as if it was eternal. That is a critical, erroneous premise. It is the Torah that says that physical life must be treated exactly what it is, transient. And that it is spiritual life which is eternal. But that's not an easy transition to make. That's not easy to think in those terms. Because since we are so imbued with the physical becomes for us Olam Haba. That's why we try and become happy here. We try and achieve perfection here. Because as far as we are concerned, this is Olam Haba. But it is the Torah that says that is the greatest error you can make. If I can simply describe to you the most catastrophic premise or proposition that you can entertain, it's that physical life is eternal. And you may say, well, I know physical life is not eternal. I know I'm going to die. That's not true. Because every second that you live is an illusion of eternity. You never think, really, in terms of the moment you die, until it hits you. Because it's always somebody else, way down ahead, up in the future. But there's always a sense of permanence, now, as if it's going to always go on. You see. I was once in a certain store in a certain place, and I saw an old, apparently Jewish woman who was sitting in a wheelchair, and she was quite arthritic and so on, and she had Parkinson's or whatever the story is, and she had and right next to her, taking care of her, was a black woman, an older black woman in her 50s, who was like her servant, like a house servant or whatever the story is. And the black woman turned to me, and I looked at the woman, and I'm kind of just so on. And the black woman said, and she said to me, and she said a word of incredible wisdom. She really did. She said to me the following, very simple. She said, we all think that we won't wind up like that. That is the biggest mistake we make. And she wasn't referring to, let's say, the sickness of that person, to the age of that person. We all think, the illusion of youth, we all think that our youth will last forever, and that our power will last forever, and that we won't know. For some reason, she got old, but we won't. She got old, you see. She had the unglück, the misfortune of getting old, because she didn't live right. You see. But that's not going to happen to us. That is a deadly error. Because that happens to everyone. Not in that form, but eventually that happens to everyone. And it is critically important to know that now. To realize that the physical life is transient in essence. And it is the spiritual life which is permanent. And that we begin to look at this. That we begin to look at our life now in that particular measure. And if we do that, and it's painful to do that, it is. But I'm not saying to run towards death. Chas v'sholom. I am simply saying to acknowledge the fact that someday it's not going to be here. And I'm asking you to acknowledge it so that you can do what's right, so that you can live forever. You see, that's why. So that you can live forever, because there is a forever to live. And it's in your hands. But the problem is that the ability is only now. This blackboard is blank now. You've got the chalk in your hand and you can do what you want now. God gave you incredible power. But it's not the power to determine what? Your physical future. It is the power to determine your eternal future. But you insist on giving him back the chalk and usurping his power. You insist on saying that I have the ability to create existence for all time. You see, now in this life, and God says that's not true. You only have the power to create your own existence of yourself. You can't control physical universe, or ultimately what will happen in the destinies of all the world. That's my business. I create existence. You can create yourself. You see, in that sense, I have given you the gift of being God. And that's an incredible power, because you have the ability to be and to last forever in that way. But we can only do it if we see things correctly. It's right thinking, correct thinking. That's all it is. And if you begin to slowly see yourself in that way, you will see it's not as painful as it is. Look at life as a conversation between you and God, and talk back to Him constantly through life as a conversation. And you will be greatly ahead of the game. You will see that a slight shift in that kind of thinking will have enormous and profound implications on your life on a day-to-day basis. Next week, we will go into this topic, which is a concept that there is a third category of suffering. And that category applies to certain select individuals who suffer for all of humanity, so that humanity can survive. Why they suffer, who some of these people are, and what they have to do with this whole thing is something we will discuss next week. No. But this year is not a turnover. Gotta end. Come back next week. Here's an incentive to come back. Right.